After 10 years of bloodshed, broken oaths, and divine manipulation, Troy, a city of marble towers and ancient legend, lay in ruins. Its walls, once thought unbreakable, had fallen not to brute force, but to cunning. The Greeks had slipped inside a wooden horse, offered as a parting gift. When night fell and the Trojans slept, victory emerged from within their own gates. And among the masterminds of that deception was Odysseus, king of the rocky isle of Ithaca. Clever Odysseus, wily, silver-tongued Odysseus, the man of schemes. But as dawn spilled across the blackened ruins of Troy, Odysseus did not feel victorious. He stood on the scorched hilltop where once rose Priam's palace, his war-scarred bronze armor dulled by soot and time. Wind howled through hollow buildings. Somewhere in the distance, dogs barked and seabirds screamed. But there were no soldiers cheering, no priests offering sacrifices, no families reunited. Only the crackle of fire and the cries of widows. 10 years, hundreds dead, thousands more ruined. Victory felt empty. Odysseus wasn't a man unused to death. He had killed. He had watched his men die in foreign dust. He had seen gods take sides and mortals lose everything, but something about Troy, the finality of it, unsettled him. It wasn't just a city that fell. It was the end of something bigger. "Odysseus," said Eurylochus, his second in command, appearing from behind a broken column. "The men are gathered on the beach. They're waiting for your word." He nodded, slow and distant. "We'll sail at first light." "You're not coming now." "In a moment." Eurylochus hesitated. He wasn't used to hesitation in his captain, not this man, but he left him in peace. Alone again, Odysseus knelt and scooped a handful of Troy's ash into his hand. He let it slip between his fingers, soft as silk, dark as sorrow. He whispered no prayer. He simply looked eastward, toward the sea, and toward home. Down by the shore, 12 ships waited, sleek, fast vessels with curved prows and red-painted eyes meant to ward off evil. Each was crewed by men hardened by war and wearied by time. Farmers turned warriors, sailors turned thieves, sons turned killers. They were not what they once were. Some still bore souvenirs of Troy, jewels, amphorae, stolen scrolls, even Trojan women taken as captives. Others bore nothing but wounds. Their gazes, once sharp and eager, now flickered with fatigue and the silent question. What next? Odysseus arrived silently. He carried no gold, no trophy, only a small satchel and a bronze dagger. He nodded once. That was enough. The ships pushed off as the first streaks of dawn painted the water gold. Troy grew smaller and smaller behind them. No one looked back. The first days at sea passed gently. The wind was fair, the sky kind. Dolphins followed the ships, seabirds wheeled overhead. For the first time in years, there was laughter, real laughter, among the men. Some sang songs from home. Others carved wood or mended nets. A few even spoke of what they would do when they reached Ithaca. "Will Penelope even recognize you, Odysseus?" Eurylochus joked one night beside the campfire. "She will," Odysseus said with a smile, "or I'll make her fall in love with me all over again." But beneath the humor he worried. 10 years was a long time. Children became adults, friends became strangers. Kingdoms changed. Would his own house even be his when he returned? He didn't say it aloud, but he carried the thought like a shadow. One night, as the fleet anchored by a small island for rest, Odysseus stood alone at the water's edge. The sea shimmered with moonlight. In its reflection he thought he saw eyes vast and deep, staring back. He knew what it meant. Poseidon. The sea god did not forget. And Odysseus had angered him more than once, mocking his son, aiding the fall of Troy, speaking pridefully of his own cunning. There would be consequences, but not yet. For now, the water was calm. But calm seas rarely lasted long for Odysseus. The first light of dawn glimmered off the waves as the Greek ships cut through the calm sea, their sails billowing in the steady breeze. The men of Ithaca had been at sea for weeks now, their muscles tight from rowing, their spirits worn by the endless horizon of blue. But now the promise of land stirred something wild in their hearts. Ahead, the coastline of Ismarus emerged, a crescent of golden sand, backed by rolling hills draped in dark green olive groves and thick clusters of pine. Smoke curled lazily from the thatched rooftops of the village, nestled just beyond the dunes. Birds rose in startled flocks as the ships neared shore. Odysseus stood tall on the prow of the flagship, eyes sharp, voice calm but commanding. "We have fought and bled for 10 long years," he told the men, "and now we must be wise. We come not as conquerors here, but as survivors in need of rest." But his words fell like whispers on a storm wind. The men's eyes gleamed with a different fire, one born of hunger, weariness, and a savage yearning for spoils. No sooner had the ships grounded than the warriors spilled ashore, their armor clinking, weapons glinting in the sun. The Cicones, caught unarmed in their fields and homes, had no time to rally. The Greeks swept through the village like a wildfire. Men were cut down without warning, women and children left trembling in the shadow of swords. They seized gold ornaments, filled sacks with fine cloth, and herded cattle toward the ships. Wine amphorae were smashed and drained, spilling their precious contents onto the thirsty earth. Laughter and shouting echoed through the streets, a savage chorus of triumph. Odysseus watched with growing unease. "Enough," he commanded, voice rising above the clamor. "Gather what we need and prepare to sail. We cannot tarry." But his men were drunk on victory and greed. They ignored his warnings and turned the village into a drunken carnival. The Greeks butchered cattle on the beach, roasting meat over open fires. Wine flowed freely, poured into bowls, and passed from hand to hand. The men sprawled in the sun, their heavy laughter mingling with the crashing waves. Some recounted tales of Troy, their voices thick with drink and nostalgia. Others boasted of feats of strength, daring each other to drink more, fight more, live more, as if the world would never ask for more in return. Odysseus paced the shore, eyes scanning the hills where dark shapes moved among the trees. He knew that the Cicones would not take this insult lightly. "We are guests in this land for no more than a moment," he warned, "and guests must not overstay their welcome." His voice was swallowed by the revelry. The men's revelry had become a shield against the uncertainty of the journey ahead, a fragile illusion of control in a world governed by gods and fate. As the first light of dawn broke the horizon, a sharp horn shattered the calm. From the wooded hills, armed riders emerged, Cicone warriors mounted on swift chariots, their spears leveled, faces set in grim determination. The surviving villagers had not fled. They had regrouped and called for reinforcements. Now they surged down the slopes with furious speed, eyes blazing with the desire for revenge. Caught by surprise, the Greek men scrambled to arms, some still clutching wine cups, others dragging armor onto their backs. Odysseus shouted orders, forming ranks, raising shields, calling for the steady discipline that had seen them through Troy. But the beach, soaked with spilled wine and blood, became a brutal battlefield. The Ciconian charge broke the disorganized Greek lines. Spears found flesh, arrows pierced armor, and cries of pain mingled with the roar of battle. Men fell like wheat before the scythe. The beach, once a place of triumph, was now a slaughter ground. Battered and bloodied, Odysseus sounded the retreat. The Greeks fled to their ships, dragging wounded and dead with them. The Cicones' pursuit was relentless, but the Greeks finally pushed off into the sea, oars splashing frantically as they escaped the shore. 6 men from every ship were lost, friends, brothers, fathers. Their bodies were wrapped in sailcloth and sent to the depths in silent funerals beneath the waves. The mood was somber. The men stared into the distance, their faces etched with regret and shame. Odysseus stood at the stern, his expression carved from stone. "You were warned," he said quietly, "but still you chose to linger, to feast on the spoils before the battle was truly won. Let this be a lesson. No victory is without price, and no journey is without peril." The sea stretched wide and cold ahead, and the god's eyes seemed to pierce through the mist, watching, waiting. The long road home had grown darker. The sun sank slowly beneath the restless waves, casting a blood-red glow that seemed to bleed into the sky itself. The men of Ithaca readied for nightfall, weary but hopeful, after days of travel through the open sea. But the horizon betrayed them. Dark clouds gathered with unnatural speed, blotting out the fading light. The air grew heavy and electric, charged with a menace that crawled into the bones. Odysseus stood on the deck, eyes narrowing as the wind shifted abruptly, bringing a bitter chill. "This is no ordinary storm," he said quietly, voice heavy with dread. "The earth shaker stirs. Poseidon, god of the seas, has taken notice." Around him, the crew fell silent, the weight of those words sinking in. No man alive could tame the sea god's fury. Then it began. The first crash of thunder shattered the evening calm. The sky ripped open in a jagged flash of lightning, revealing the churning, angry sea below. Winds howled like banshees, tearing sails to tatters, whipping salt spray into the faces of the men. The ships pitched violently, thrown like toys between monstrous waves that rose taller than towers, white crests breaking like foaming jaws. Men screamed, clutching ropes and rails with knuckles white as cold water drenched them. The air was thick with the stench of fear and salt. Odysseus fought at the helm, muscles straining against the wheel that seemed to wrestle with the storm itself. The ocean's roar drowned out all else, a wild, unrelenting beast bent on destruction. For days, the storm raged without mercy. The stars vanished, swallowed by black clouds. Time lost meaning amid the endless battering of wind and sea. The fleet fractured. Ships were torn apart, smashed on unseen reefs or swallowed whole by the abyss. Shouts and cries were lost beneath the thunderous crash of waves. On one ship, a mast snapped like a dry branch, sending men plunging into the freezing water. On another, fire broke out, probably from lightning, and was quickly extinguished in the torrential rain, but not before claiming lives. Odysseus called for order, his voice a beacon amid the madness, but even his command faltered against the relentless assault. Fatigue and despair spread like a disease. Men who had fought armies and monsters now found themselves powerless. They clung to hope as the ship tossed and turned like a leaf, hearts hammering against the terror of oblivion. Odysseus's mind raced, not with battle strategy, but with prayers and pleas, to Athena for wisdom, to Zeus for mercy, to Poseidon for any sign of reprieve. But the sea god's wrath was absolute. Lightning cracked again, illuminating the wide eyes of terrified men, mouths open in silent screams. The storm had stripped them of their pride and purpose. They were no longer heroes, but prey on a god's hunt. When the storm finally relented, it left a scarred and broken world. The sky cleared slowly, revealing strange constellations unfamiliar to the Greek mariners. The familiar North Star was gone, lost beneath unfamiliar skies. Odysseus's ship drifted alone, battered and half-sunken, in waters unknown. The fleet was gone, scattered, sunk, or driven far beyond reach. The men aboard were silent, faces etched with exhaustion and grief. They counted their losses, brothers and friends swallowed by the sea's insatiable hunger. Odysseus stood at the helm, the weight of command heavier than ever. His eyes scanned the empty horizon. Behind him the gods watched, silent, inscrutable, indifferent, or perhaps mocking. The journey home was no longer a hopeful adventure. It was a desperate battle against fate, the gods, and the endless sea. The wind fell still as dusk painted the sky in soft lavender and coral. From the ship, land appeared as a low green smudge, barely rising above the horizon. No mountains, no smoke, no sign of war, just stillness. The air thickened as they neared the shore, rich, humid, fragrant. A breeze carried the scent of flowers unfamiliar to the men of Ithaca, something sweet and strange and impossibly ancient. "Land," one man whispered, voice hoarse from days without comfort. At last. The men begged Odysseus for permission to disembark. Exhausted, blistered and hungry, they pleaded not as warriors but as children too tired to keep walking. Odysseus nodded, but even as he gave the order, something inside him stirred, a slow tugging dread. The sea had not roared a warning. No storm had announced their arrival. It was too quiet. The ship scraped the shore, and they stepped onto a world that seemed to breathe without them. There was no fanfare, no challenge. The people who greeted them had the look of peace carved into their faces, open smiles, slow movements, laughter soft and directionless. They bore no weapons, no armor, no fear. They moved as though time did not touch them. "Rest," one of them said, a woman whose skin glowed with sun and sea air. "You are safe here." Another offered golden petals shaped like tiny flames. "Eat. You are tired. You don't need to keep running." "These are the lotus eaters," murmured a sailor who'd heard the old stories. "They feed on flowers. They forget." But even that warning was said with wonder, not fear. The blossoms pulsed with a scent like memory and honey. The men hesitated and then reached. The petals dissolved on the tongue like snow. Within minutes, the men's postures changed. Tension slipped from their shoulders. Their eyes drifted unfocused. Their words slowed, then stopped. They forgot they were tired because they forgot why they'd been pushing forward at all. Odysseus watched in horror as men who had once held swords with iron discipline now lay on the ground, arms behind their heads, smiling dumbly at the sky. "Ithaca," one muttered. "That was a dream." Another looked up at Odysseus and blinked, confused. "Are we still at sea?" A third laughed. "We're here now. Isn't that enough?" They no longer knew who they were. They no longer cared. The island offered no pain, no hunger, no fear, but it offered something more dangerous than death. It offered escape. Not in ships, not through victory, but through oblivion. Here, there were no storms, no cries of dying comrades, no gods to offend, no home to long for. Here, grief was gone, and that made it almost impossible to resist. Odysseus knelt beside one of his oldest men, a companion who had survived Troy, who had carried messages through enemy lines. He was now reclined beneath a fig tree, eyes half-lidded, smiling at nothing. "I'll stay here," the man whispered. "There's nothing for me out there." Odysseus felt a crack in his own will. For a moment, he saw the temptation clearly, to sleep, to forget, to leave behind the burden of leadership, loss and longing. A part of him wanted it, but only a part. Odysseus stood. Then he shouted, not in rage, but in command. Voice sharp, cold and clear, like a war horn cutting fog. "Get up! You are men of Ithaca! You are not done!" Some stirred, but others resisted, their faces slack with the comfort of forgetting. Odysseus seized them one by one, dragging them to the boats. When they protested, he tied them down. When they wept, he did not waver. "This is not peace," he told them. "This is death without dying." The blossoms were gathered and thrown into the surf, dozens of golden petals floating like lost dreams. The ship launched again under a sky darkened by twilight. They did not speak for a long while. The men sat at their benches, bound or dazed, watching the shoreline fade into mist. Some wept, others glared. A few stared silently into the sea, the memory of the lotus already fraying in their minds. Odysseus stood at the stern, the tiller creaking beneath his grip. He did not look back, not this time. But in his mind the memory of the island lingered, not its beauty, but its ease. The way it offered exactly what the soul craved, just enough to forget what the soul needed. Peace without meaning, rest without purpose, life without striving. He would carry the weight of resistance alone if he had to, for there was no peace for those who still remembered, and he remembered everything. By dawn they saw it, a jagged silhouette rising from the sea, dark cliffs and volcanic slopes twisted like the bones of the earth itself. There were no ports, no cities, no firelight, only smoke curling from high crags, and the mournful cry of seabirds echoing through the caverns. Odysseus ordered his ship to hold offshore. He scanned the terrain, eyes narrowing. "This is not a land of men," he said. "This is something older." The men begged for rest. Supplies were low. The storm had stripped them of fresh water, and their rations had turned to mold. A small landing party was formed, Odysseus and 12 chosen men. They rowed toward the island with weary hearts and dry mouths. Behind them, The rest of the fleet waited, hidden behind cliffs, still nursing the wounds of the sea. The Cyclops Cave. Temptation in the dark. The party climbed inland, where wild goats roamed the slopes. They passed gnarled fig trees, sharp-smelling herbs, and deep gullies of black rock. And then they found it. A cave carved into the mountain, its mouth vast and yawning like a titan's jaw. Inside, the air was cool and damp. The floor was thick with straw. Massive racks of cheese lined the walls. Giant clay jars brimmed with milk. Livestock bleated from pens. Oversized goats and ewes, their eyes dull and slow. The men marveled at the bounty. "Let us take what we can and leave before the owner returns," one whispered. But Odysseus shook his head. "Number we will wait. A gift, if offered by a host, binds them to us by the god's law of hospitality." He believed even now in custom, in civilization, in the old ways of men and gods. But the creature that lived here was not a man, and it feared no god. Polyphemus, the monster in the doorway. At twilight, the giant returned. His shadow fell long across the land. The ground shook with his steps. The sheep bleated in greeting, and then the boulder, 10 men's weight at least, was rolled across the mouth of the cave with a grinding rumble. They were trapped. Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, was huge, half again as tall as any man, with limbs like tree trunks and a single eye in the center of his forehead, bright and wet and unblinking. He reeked of smoke and blood and sour milk. When he saw the strangers, he did not shout. He laughed. And then, without a word, he reached out, grabbed 2 men by the legs, and dashed them against the rocks like clay jars. Bones split, blood sprayed, the screams echoed once, and then were gone. The Cyclops ate them raw, limbs first, faces last, cunning versus brutality. Odysseus thinks. The survivors pressed themselves against the walls, frozen with horror. Odysseus remained still, but inside, his mind blazed. To kill the monster now would be simple. A sword through the gut, a dagger in the neck. But the boulder, no man could move it. They would all die in the dark. Number, this was not a fight of strength. This was a game of wits. That night, Odysseus waited. By dawn, the Cyclops had eaten again. 2 more men gone in a blur of teeth and laughter. Odysseus stepped forward. "I bring you a gift, mighty one." He offered wine, dark and potent, captured from the Cicones, still sealed in goatskin. The Cyclops drank, then drank again, then laughed, his eye growing heavy. "What is your name?" he asked, slurring. Odysseus smiled. "Nobody, I am called." And Polyphemus laughed until the cave trembled. When the Cyclops slept, the men acted. They took a stake, thick as a mast, sharpened at one end, hardened in the fire. They lifted it as one, hearts pounding, breath held, and drove it into the monster's eye. The scream that followed shook the island. Polyphemus thrashed, tearing at the air, knocking aside animals and amphorae. Blood and smoke filled the cave as he howled for vengeance. "Nobody has blinded me," he roared to his kin outside. And so they left him. For what harm could nobody cause? Inside, the men clung to life, waiting for dawn, hiding among the sheep. When morning came, Polyphemus groaned, weeping and furious. He moved the boulder and felt each sheep as they passed, running his hands along their woolly backs to find the men he knew must be there. But Odysseus was clever. Each man clung to the belly of a sheep, tied beneath with leather straps. Odysseus himself rode beneath the largest ram. The Cyclops let them pass unaware. And as they reached the open air, they ran, silent, breathless, soaked in sweat and blood. They reached the ship and shoved off, oars splashing frantically, sails catching the wind. They were not safe. Not yet. From the deck of his ship, Odysseus could not resist. He turned and shouted across the waves, "Cyclops! It was Odysseus who blinded you, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca." The cliffs echoed the name like a curse. Polyphemus staggered to the shoreline, bleeding, roaring, hands raised to the sky. He prayed aloud to his father, "Poseidon, Earthshaker, hear me. Let Odysseus never return home, or let him suffer long and return to sorrow. The wind fell still. The sea began to boil, and far beneath the waves something ancient stirred. Odysseus sat in silence as the island disappeared behind them. His men cheered weakly, alive but haunted. None of them looked back. The cost of victory weighed heavy. He had outwitted a monster, but he had awoken a god. Days after fleeing the wrath of the Cyclops, the sea calmed, not by chance, but as if held in place. The ship crested a wave, and there it was, Aeolia, a floating island wreathed in mist and cloud. Sheer cliffs surrounded it like walls forged by the gods. Bronze shone from its ramparts and towers glittered in the sun. Windmills turned slowly in the sky above, their blades catching currents unseen. This was no mortal place. As they approached, the wind fell away entirely. The ship drifted like a leaf on glass. No tide, no current, only stillness. Then a gate opened in the cliffs. It did not swing or groan. It breathed, and Aeolus, keeper of the winds, welcomed them. Inside the palace, the air moved in strange ways. It whispered through columns. It tugged at cloaks without warning. It carried laughter from unseen places and scents from distant lands. Aeolus himself sat on a throne of drifting cloud, robes fluttering though there was no breeze. His eyes gleamed with skylight, and his voice carried weight without volume. "You are Odysseus," he said, not asking but knowing. Wanderer, warrior, survivor. Odysseus bowed. "And you are the master of the breath between all lands." Aeolus smiled. "Then let us speak of your voyage." For a month they stayed. Aeolus listened to Odysseus's tales with fascination. Troy, Ismarus, the Lotus Eaters, the Cyclops. He gave them food, drink, music, shelter. A rare thing, peace without deception. But time moved strangely in Aeolia. A day might stretch to a week might vanish in a breath. Eventually, Odysseus knew they could not linger. "Ithaca still waits," he said. Aeolus nodded and stood. As Odysseus prepared to leave, Aeolus gave him a gift, a leather bag sealed with silver thread and bound tight with golden cords. "Within this sack," Aeolus said, "are all the winds of the world. I have placed every storm, every squall, every wayward breeze inside, except one, the west wind, which will carry you straight to Ithaca." Odysseus took the bag reverently. "You trust me with the breath of the world?" "I trust you with the price of your journey," Aeolus said. "But beware, if this seal is broken by mortal hands, no man, no god, will contain what escapes." And so the ship set sail again, with the wind at its back and the scent of home on the air. For 9 days they sailed westward. The sea was gentle, the skies clear, the men hopeful. They ate modestly, spoke quietly, and began to imagine the sound of familiar waves on Ithaca's shores. Then land, Ithaca itself, rising on the edge of the dawn, close enough to smell olive trees on the breeze, close enough to cry. Odysseus, weary from steering night after night, collapsed on the deck in sleep. And that was when temptation struck. The crew gathered around the strange bag. They whispered, they argued, they guessed. "He said it was full of treasure," one murmured. "Gold, jewels, spoils from Troy he kept for himself. He sleeps while we labor. Why should he return richer than us?" Greed and resentment, slow burning since Troy, flickered into flame. While Odysseus dreamt of home, his men loosened the golden cords. The seal broke, and the winds screamed. The storm unbound, fury reborn. A sudden blast hurled the ship sideways. The mast cracked, sailcloth tore like paper. The sea rose instantly, as if hurled from beneath by the fist of a god. Winds of every direction, east, north, south, fought each other like wild beasts, tangling in madness. The island vanished. Ithaca was gone. They were spun backward through the sea, powerless, weeping, helpless. Odysseus woke to chaos and knew at once what had happened. His eyes met those of his crew, and though none spoke, their shame was clear. Too late. The sea had reclaimed them. Broken and battered, they made their way back to Aeolia. Odysseus stood once more before the Windkeeper, humbled and silent. Aeolus took one look and turned away. "You were favored," he said, "but the gods oppose you. I will not help a man so cursed." And with that, the gates closed. No gift, no second chance. The sea offered them only wind and wandering. They rode into silence, the bag now just empty leather flapping on the deck like a broken sail. The men no longer spoke of Ithaca. They feared even to dream of it. Odysseus sat at the prow, eyes ahead, the burden of leadership heavy once more. He had held the winds of the world in his hands and lost them. Days after departing the floating isle of Aeolus, the sea calmed, too calm. The Ithacans approached a coastline unlike any they had seen, a steep, rocky landscape lined with towering cliffs, black as iron, and canyons carved by ancient rivers. A narrow fjord snaked inland, its waters eerily still, its entrance barely wide enough for a single ship at a time. It looked like a safe harbor. It wasn't. 11 ships slipped in one after the other, rowing slowly through the canyon's jaws. Sheer walls rose around them, blocking the wind, the sky, even the sound of waves. It was so quiet, the men whispered. Odysseus, scarred by experience, sharpened by loss, hung back. His own ship he anchored just outside the harbor mouth, as if the very stillness were bait. The others called him cautious. They would soon call him something else. From the anchored fleet, Odysseus sent out scouts. 3 men were chosen, good runners, clever eyes. They scaled the steep inland slope beyond the cove and followed a winding trail into a pine-choked valley where stone houses stood scattered like bones. No smoke from chimneys, no birds in the trees, no children in the streets, just quiet. Until they saw her. A girl stood beside a freshwater spring, tall, strange-eyed, unnaturally pale. She did not flee, she did not speak. Instead, she turned and gestured silently for them to follow. They did. She led them to a high stone house on a cliff above the cove. Its door was large enough for 3 men to pass side by side. The walls were etched with clawed grooves, and bones lay scattered in the dust. The girl slipped inside, and a moment later so did her father. The king of hunger. His name was Antiphates, a mountain of flesh, with teeth like shattered stones, and eyes sunk deep beneath a shelf of bone. He was a giant, not in legend, not in metaphor, but in monstrous walking truth. Before the scouts could scream, he seized one man in his fist and bit off his head, cracking bone like a crab shell. The others ran. Behind them, the king bellowed, a sound that split the valley like thunder, and the hills awoke. Giant doors opened. Feet thundered across the stone paths. The Laestrygonians were coming. The scouts fled downhill, screaming to the fleet. But it was already too late. From the cliffs that ringed the harbor, the Laestrygonians descended in swarms, giants with clubs of stone, boulders hefted on their shoulders like pebbles. They moved with impossible speed, howling with a hunger that had waited for years. Odysseus watched from beyond the harbor mouth as the first boulder hit a ship, shattering its stern. Then another, and another. The harbor, narrow as a knife slit, gave the Ithacans no room to maneuver. One by one, the ships were smashed, capsized, or pulled to shore where screaming men were speared and dragged, screaming into cooking pits. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Odysseus cut the anchor rope with his dagger. "Row!" he shouted. His men obeyed. The single surviving ship turned away as the cliffs rang with screams. From the mouth of the fjord, they saw the sea behind them turn red. 11 ships lost. Hundreds of men, brothers, friends, sons, gone in moments. The giants watched them go. None followed. None needed to. Telepilas had fed well. The surviving crew, what remained of Ithaca's proud fleet, sat broken in body and spirit. They rowed in silence. Even Odysseus, ever the voice in the storm, could not speak. The sea, once enemy, now felt like refuge. At dusk, a man whispered the names of the fallen. Another wept. Another asked, "Are we cursed?" Odysseus said nothing. He looked toward the west, toward home. Then he closed his eyes and whispered a prayer to no god in particular. "Let their deaths not be in vain. Let at least one of us reach Ithaca." That night, no fires were lit, no songs were sung, just the sound of oars and grief. Odysseus sat at the prow watching the stars emerge, each one a silent eye, reminding him how far they still had to go. The war at Troy had been brutal, but home would be earned through hell. For days they sailed through mourning. The sea itself seemed to grieve, its surface silver and still, as though even Poseidon had turned his gaze away. No laughter, no song, just wind and the rhythm of oars breaking silence. Then at last, a new shore. Aiaia. An island wrapped in low fog and drifting birdsong, where pine trees bowed as if whispering secrets. The hills glowed green, unnatural and soft. A gentle breeze carried strange scents, jasmine, honey, crushed herbs. The men were hesitant. They had seen too much. Land can be death, one muttered. But hunger outweighed fear. They beached the ship in a quiet cove and built a small camp beneath the trees. A lookout was posted. Fires were kindled. Water was found. Still, something about the island watched. Odysseus climbed a bluff and looked inland. There, rising through the trees like something half-dreamed, stood a house, not built by mortals, but grown of marble and vine. Columns twisted like branches. Smoke rose from its hearth. Birds circled it, unnaturally quiet. Odysseus chose 22 men, among them Eurylochus, his most cautious lieutenant. "Scout the house," Odysseus said. "See who dwells there." They climbed cautiously through dappled light until they reached the clearing, and there, at the threshold, a woman waited. She was beautiful, but not as mortals are. Her hair shimmered like midnight oil. Her eyes were wolfish gold. She wore robes dyed in impossible hues, violet, sea glass, ash. Around her, animals watched in unnatural silence. Lions, wolves, deer, unblinking, tamed, aware. "I am Circe," she said, her voice a melody carved from smoke. "Enter, eat, you are safe here." The men hesitated, but hunger speaks louder than fear. They followed her into the hall. They drank wine infused with honey and strange spices. They feasted on roasted meats, fruit dripping with nectar, bread that steamed as if freshly pulled from the gods' own ovens. Then she lifted her staff. One by one, the men fell from their benches, eyes wide, limbs twitching. Their bodies twisted, shrank, reshaped. Snouts lengthened, skin thickened into bristles. Their screams became grunts. Where 20 men had sat, now 20 pigs squealed and stampeded in panic. Only Eurylochus, wary and shrewd, had stayed outside. He ran back through the woods, breath ragged, heart hammering. Odysseus's decision, descent into the unknown. Odysseus listened in silence. His jaw tightened. He took up his sword and bow. "I go alone," he said. "But she turned men into animals," Eurylochus pleaded. "She's not mortal." All the more reason to face her. He walked into the woods as the light dimmed and the trees whispered. Aiaia felt alive, listening, waiting. At the edge of the clearing, Odysseus paused, and someone stepped from the shadows. A man in a cloak of stormlight. Hermes. The god's eyes gleamed like lightning. "Circe is clever," he said, "but not invincible. Take this." He handed Odysseus a sprig of moly, a black-stemmed herb with a snow-white flower. "It will guard your mind from her spell." "And what if she strikes with a blade?" Odysseus asked. "Then she dies, but I think you'll find her persuadable." With that, Hermes vanished, as gods do, on the breath of the wind. Circe welcomed Odysseus into her hall with that same honeyed voice. "Eat," she said, offering a goblet. He drank. Nothing happened. Her eyes narrowed. She raised her staff, and he drew his sword. The room stilled. The lions at her feet growled. The wolves tensed. But Circe looked not afraid, only intrigued. "You resisted me. I've lost too much to tricks. And yet here you stand." For a long moment, they stared at one another, sorceress and swordsman, each weighing the other's will. Then Circe smiled slowly. "Very well, Odysseus. You are different. Let us speak." She kept her word. At his command, she turned the pigs back into men. They rose trembling, naked, changed, not just in body, but in spirit. For some part of them would always remember the beast. They stayed. Days turned into weeks. Circe offered no prison, only comfort, warm beds, sweet food, gentle hands. For the first time in months, Odysseus's men laughed again. And still they remained. Odysseus slept in Circe's bed, ate at her table, walked her gardens, but he did not forget Ithaca. He stood sometimes at the cliffs, staring out over the sea, haunted by what lay behind and what might still lie ahead. And finally he asked her, "How do I return home?" Circe's face darkened. "Before you return, you must descend to the land of the dead, to speak with the blind prophet Tiresias. He alone knows the way." Odysseus said nothing. He understood the weight of the journey was not only in miles, but in memory, in grief, in sacrifice. She gave him instructions, a black ram, a trench, blood, words of power and courage to face the shades of the past. Then she kissed his brow, and once more they set sail, not for home, but for Hades, for truth. The sea changed. As the ship sailed from Aea, warmth fell away. The waves grew black, the air thick with silence. Birds vanished, the sun dimmed, time slowed. Even the men, though hardened by terror and grief, felt a new dread, a deeper current pulling beneath the keel, a feeling that what lay ahead was not meant for mortal eyes. Odysseus stood at the prow, wind tugging at his cloak. They were sailing north, not to any map, but toward the edge of the known world. Circe had marked it clearly, where the river ocean flows into the world's edge. There the dead whisper. No port waited, no land welcomed them. Only mist, memory, and the mouths of ghosts. At last they saw it, grey land beneath a sky that did not change. No trees, no wind, no color, just a narrow strip of cold rock between black waters and the infinite beyond. They pulled the ship ashore in silence. Odysseus stepped down first. His boots crunched over frost-bitten soil. "Here," he said. "We do it here." Circe had taught the rite, and Odysseus followed it to the word. He dug a trench, narrow and deep, and poured in offerings, milk, honey, water, then fine barley. He added prayers to the dead, to Persephone, to Hades. Then solemnly he drew his knife. 2 black animals, ram and ewe, were sacrificed. Their blood flowed into the trench, steaming in the cold. Then came silence. Then came voices. First, eyes, dozens, then hundreds, glowing faintly in the dark. Shapes emerged, tall, broken, flickering like torn banners in a windless sky. These were the shades, the dead, stripped of flesh and memory. Some looked like warriors, others like kings. Some still wept, some screamed. All were drawn to the blood. The crew stepped back. Only Odysseus held his ground, sword in hand, guarding the trench. Circe had warned him, "Let no shade drink until Tiresias has spoken, or all will be lost." The dead clawed at the earth, whispering his name. The first shade to speak was not a stranger. It was Elpenor, the youngest of Odysseus's crew, who had died on Aea after drunkenly falling from Circe's roof. He looked confused, hollow. "Captain," he said, voice echoing like wind in a cave, "you left me unburied." Odysseus felt the guilt rise like bile. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Burn my body," Elpenor begged. "Give me rights, or I wander forever." Odysseus swore it. Elpenor faded into the mist. At last, Tiresias came. He moved like smoke, tall and blind, a prophet, even in death. Odysseus stepped aside and let him drink the blood. When he did, the shade grew brighter, more solid, more real. Tiresias's mouth opened. "Odysseus, son of Laertes," he intoned, "you seek Ithaca, but the sea does not give gifts." He spoke of the journey ahead, of Thrinacia, where Helios kept his sacred cattle, of the temptation the crew would face, of the wrath that would follow if they slaughtered what was forbidden. "If they eat the cattle," Tiresias said, "your ship will break and you will return alone, after long years and much suffering." Odysseus's jaw tightened. "And when I do?" "Even then," said Tiresias, "your trials will not be over. You must make peace with Poseidon, in a place where no one knows the sea." Odysseus lowered his head. The prophecy was clear. Suffering was not just a path, it was a necessity. And then came a voice he had not expected. "Odysseus." He turned. It was his mother. Anticleia, pale and quiet, stood apart from the other shades. Her face was gentler than he remembered. Her voice cracked like old wood. "I died, waiting," she said softly, "waiting for your return." He tried to hold her, but his hands passed through hers like mist. "Don't mourn me," she said. "Mourn your father. Mourn your wife. Mourn your son." Her voice caught. "They believe you dead. All of Ithaca is a grave now." Odysseus knelt. "I am coming home." "Then hurry," she whispered, "before home forgets you." She vanished. The line of the fallen others came next, shades of heroes. Agamemnon, who spoke of betrayal at the hands of his wife. Achilles, who said death was a cold kingdom, and that even a slave among the living was luckier than a king of the dead. Ajax, who would not speak, still bitter over their quarrel. And there were others, more ancient, more unknowable. Men who had fought with gods, women who had outlived empires. The blood called them all. They came not for comfort, but for memory. Departure from shadow. The trench ran dry. The last of the blood soaked into earth. The shades faded, and the world grew still. The crew, wide-eyed, said nothing as they returned to the ship. No one looked back. They rowed in silence, the only sound the drip of water and the creak of wood. Odysseus sat alone near the stern, hand still on his sword. He had seen death, he had heard the price, and he knew the worst was yet to come. The sea seemed brighter now, sunlit, silvered, alive again. But Odysseus had changed. Since returning from the underworld, silence had taken root in him. Even laughter on deck now sounded distant, like echoes from a former life. His crew did not ask questions. They had seen too much, and they had heard what awaited them. Circe's final warning lingered in his thoughts. "Next, you will sail past the Sirens, creatures who sing not to destroy, but to seduce. Their voices are as soft as dreams, but they call out your truths, your fears, your deepest longings. Any man who listens will forget everything. He will not eat. He will not sleep. He will not want anything but the song." Odysseus had listened to death in the underworld. Now he would listen to desire. As they approached the Sirens' waters, the sea grew mirror smooth. Even the wind pulled back in reverence, and the world fell unnaturally still. Odysseus gathered his men. He spoke with calm authority, no drama, no poetry. "You will fill your ears with wax, now every one of you." The men obeyed. Packing beeswax softened over the galley fire into their ears until sound itself became a memory. Eurylochus helped tie Odysseus to the mast. "You're sure you want this?" he asked. Odysseus met his eyes. "I must hear it. I must know what they sing." The rope went taut, his arms stretched, palms raw against the wood. "And no matter what I say, no matter what I beg, you will not untie me." The last knot was pulled. Eurylochus nodded solemnly. Then they rowed. At first there was nothing. Then the mist returned, gossamer threads that clung to the skin and drifted between the oars. The sea was so flat the stars reflected in it like a second sky, and far ahead something shimmered. An island, low, white, empty. No trees, no walls, no fire. But bones, so many bones, scattered across the shore like shells, the husks of past listeners, their ships rotted and wrecked, their hands still grasping toward the sea. And then the singing began. The voice did not come all at once. It slipped in slowly, curling like smoke, soft as breath. Not one voice, two, then more. a harmony of impossible beauty, fluid, endless, tender as longing, and it knew him. Odysseus, it whispered, son of Laertes, breaker of Troy, wielder of wit. Stay, stay and listen. He gasped, his whole body convulsed. They were inside him, inside his memories, his wounds, his regrets. Why struggle? Your journey is pain. Your wife weeps. Your son forgets you. Come here. Rest, he strained at the ropes. Untie me, he shouted. Please, gods, untie me. The crew did not hear. They rowed, eyes forward, deaf and blind to his agony. We know you, clever Odysseus. We know your tired soul. What is Ithaca now but dust and duty? What is Penelope now but fading flesh? What is a king without a kingdom? Tears streamed down his face, because they weren't lying. They had seen into him, and they had spoken the truth. And he knew the worst was yet to come. He screamed until his throat bled, begged, raged, promised gold, love, revenge. He offered everything to be untied, everything but himself. The ropes held, the mast held. He did not. He cracked, not like a shattered rock, but like an overloaded ship, one plank at a time. And then, silence. The mist lifted. The island was gone. The sea turned blue again. The wind returned. The singing stopped as if it had never existed. Odysseus slumped forward, barely conscious. His wrists were torn, his voice hoarse. His chest heaved with the rhythm of survival. The men, now able to hear, came to untie him. Did they sing? Eurylochus asked quietly. Odysseus nodded. Yes. What did they say? He looked out at the horizon. They told the truth. The ship continued on. Odysseus said little for days. The crew noticed the change. Not grief, not fear, but clarity. As though part of him had been burned away, and something older and cleaner now stood in its place. The Sirens had not lured him with pleasure. They had lured him with insight. He had seen what he was truly running from, not monsters, not war, not gods, but the weight of becoming a man who survives everything, and still chooses to go on. Before they left Aeaea for the last time, Circe took Odysseus aside. You must pass between two forces of death, she said, her tone stripped of riddles. One is a monster, the other a Moor of the sea. Odysseus listened, unmoving. To starboard lies Scylla, 12 legs, 6 heads, eyes like suns. She will seize 6 men no matter what you do. To port, the whirlpool Charybdis, she swallows the sea itself. Ships vanish their whole. Which way do I steer? He asked. Circe met his gaze. There was no comfort in her answer. Toward the monster. Better to lose 6 than all. They sailed into the strait as the morning sun turned grey. The sea narrowed, cliffs towering on both sides. A silence fell, thick, unnatural. The air stank of brine and death. Odysseus gave no commands. His men rowed in steady rhythm, their eyes fixed forward, unaware of what he had chosen to conceal. He hadn't told them. He couldn't. If they knew that death was guaranteed, 6 men gone in a breath, they would panic, flee, freeze. So he bore it alone, sword at his side, eyes scanning the cliff face, waiting. To port, the sea collapsed. A groan echoed from the deep as Charybdis stirred. The water twisted in a slow, terrible spiral. The ship leaned hard as the whirlpool pulled at its keel. The men tightened their grips. Some crossed themselves. One vomited from sheer terror, and then the sea was gone. It simply vanished into a chasm below, the ship teetering on the edge of the abyss. Deep beneath them, stones clashed, white bones tumbled, and the howl of the current sounded like a dying god. Odysseus kept them clear. Barely. The oars creaked, the hull groaned. Row! Hard to starboard! They pulled with everything they had. Charybdis let them go, for now. But death had more than one face here. To starboard, a cliff of dark rock rose like the wall of a fortress, and above them, Scylla. She struck without sound. 6 heads shot from their cave like serpents uncoiling. Each mouth was a gaping horror of triple rows of teeth, each neck longer than a mast, each attack faster than thought. And then, screams. She snatched 6 men from the deck in a single breath. One man's name, Perimedes, was still on Odysseus's lips when the beast took him. Another reached for the rigging, too late. Another clutched Odysseus's arm as the jaws closed around him. Blood rained on the deck. Bones cracked in the air. They never stood a chance. The price of passage. The ship surged forward. Scylla withdrew, retreating into her cliff with her prize. Charybdis calmed, and silence returned. 6 oars rested empty. The men said nothing. No one wailed. No one wept. Even mourning had a limit here. Odysseus sat at the helm, covered in blood, not his own, his face hollowed by what he'd known would happen. He had chosen the lesser horror, and the sea had collected its toll. That night, they buried what they could. Ceremonial offerings, weapons, bread, wine poured into the sea. The men did not blame their captain, not out loud, but their eyes spoke what words could not. You led us into the mouth of death. And yet Odysseus had no answer, because he had. Leadership was not glory here. It was arithmetic. It was gambling with human lives, choosing which friends would die and when. It was steering straight into the monster, because that was less fatal. He stared out at the stars, whispering the names of the fallen under his breath. They would not be sung of in temples, but they had given their lives so the others could sail on. The straits were behind them now, but the journey ahead was not safe. Odysseus knew what came next. The island of the sun, sacred to Helios. Circe had warned him of this too, and the punishment waiting for those who disrespected the gods. But for tonight, there was only silence. The sea rocked the ship like a cradle. No one slept well. The men feared what lay ahead. Odysseus feared what he was becoming. The sky was a perfect lie. Blue, unbroken, whispering promises of peace. Seabirds circled overhead. The island of Thrinacia shimmered on the horizon, lush, golden, untouched by war or time. That is the island of the sun, Odysseus said, eyes narrowing. Helios' sacred land. His sacred cattle graze there. We do not land, we do not touch them. The men groaned. Their arms hung like ropes. Their faces were hollowed by salt and hunger. Captain, said Eurylochus, stepping forward, we're dying. Let us rest. Just one night, one meal. Odysseus hesitated. He had survived storms, monsters, and gods, but it was his own men he could not command. Against his better judgment, he gave in. We stay, but we do not touch the cattle. Swear it. They all swore, but the gods do not deal in promises made by starving men. They camped on a bluff above the pastures. The sacred herd of Helios grazed below, sleek, white, unmarked, perfect. The kind of cattle never touched by death. That night, the wind changed, and it did not change back. For a month, they were stranded. No wind to sail, no fish to catch. Their food stores vanished. Then the dried meat. Then the wine dregs. Hunger became religion, and the island whispered temptation with every breeze. Even Odysseus felt it, some days staring too long at the herds, imagining the sizzle of meat, the smell of fat, the taste of something alive. But he refused. His men, however, were breaking. One evening, while Odysseus was praying inland, Eurylochus gathered the men. Are we to die starving on holy ground? He said bitterly. The gods don't want us dead, and if they do, better to die full than empty. The men looked at one another. What is one cow to the sun? So they crept to the pasture. They chose a calf, still young, still soft, and killed it with rough blades, muttering half-formed prayers. They cooked it over driftwood fires. They offered wine to the sky. They feasted, and the smoke curled up toward the heavens. Far above, in his chariot of fire, Helios saw his cattle, his beloved cattle, slaughtered and defiled. He flew straight to Olympus. They have done what no man should, he thundered to Zeus. If they are not punished, I will drag the sun into the underworld. Let the world rot in darkness. Zeus bowed his head. It will be done. The calm before the wrath. When Odysseus returned, he knew. The bones, the fat still hissing in the embers, the silence of his men. "What have you done?" he said. No one answered, and the sky above them turned dark too quickly. The wind returned, not to free them, but to drive them into judgment. They set sail. They left the island behind, and they sailed into wrath. Death from above it happened without warning. A bolt from the hand of Zeus split the sky. The mast shattered. Flames danced across the sail. The hull cracked like brittle shell. Men flew into the sea, burning, screaming, vanishing beneath the waves. The ship split in two. Odysseus clung to the mast, lashed there by instinct and desperation. He watched the sea swallow his crew, one by one, without ceremony. Not one man survived. Not one oar floated back. The sin had been answered. For 9 days, Odysseus drifted on the broken timber, numb, silent, fed by rain and memory. He had survived the Sirens, Scylla, Charybdis, but not his men, not their hunger, not their choice, and perhaps not his failure to stop them. The gods had taken everything. Only he remained. Next stop, Calypso's shore. On the 10th day, he saw land, low, green, dotted with trees, Ogygia, where a nymph named Calypso would take him in, where time would stop, where he would linger, not because he chose to, but because he had nothing else left to lose. Odysseus did not land on Ogygia. He washed up, wrecked, ragged, and barely alive. The sea had claimed everything: ship, crew, weapons, hope. All that remained of the man who left Troy was a trembling frame clinging to driftwood and a name whispered through cracked lips: Odysseus. The tide cast him onto a shore soft with moss and blooming thyme. Trees arched over the beach, their leaves whispering secrets. Birdsong drifted on the air, alien, sweet, unreal. He collapsed face first into the sand, and for the first time in weeks, he slept. A nymph in the shadows, Calypso, the daughter of Atlas, watched him from the forest's edge. Not with pity, not with passion, but with the still, patient gaze of one who has lived long enough to see thousands come and go. And she knew this man, not by name, but by wound. The ones who staggered onto her island were all alike, war-broken, salt-bitten, hunted by memory. She took them in, like the island itself, warm, sheltering, slow. But this one was different. Odysseus, she said to the wind, you are not ready to die. Ogygia was not like other lands. It did not age. It did not spoil. The fruits were always ripe, the springs always sweet. Flowers bloomed even in the shadows. There was no hunger here, no winter, no war. Calypso tended to him with silent grace. She bathed his wounds in oils perfumed with lavender and cedar. She fed him fruits that healed and wine that eased the noise in his skull. In time he spoke. In more time he walked. And soon he smiled. You could stay here forever, Calypso said one evening. No one dies here. No one suffers. She meant it. She offered him immortality. Become my consort, she said. I will make you deathless. Let the world grow old without you. And part of him wanted to say yes. After years of battle, betrayal, monsters and gods, wasn't peace a kind of victory? Days became seasons. Seasons bled into years. By the 5th year, Odysseus had stopped marking time. He was not in pain. He was not in motion. But each morning he would rise before dawn and climb to the island's western cliffs. He would stare across the horizon at the edge of the sea, where Ithaca might lie, invisible, unreachable. And every morning, Calypso would find him there, waiting. Why do you still look west? She asked. Because home is not where you rest, he replied. It's where you are remembered. In Olympus, the gods watched. Athena, protector of Odysseus, grew impatient. Her champion had been waylaid long enough. She went to Zeus and demanded justice. Zeus in turn summoned Hermes the messenger and gave him a task: release the wanderer. Hermes descends. He arrived like a streak of light, sandals winged, staff glowing. Calypso met him at the shore, eyes cold, voice low. "You come to steal what I love." "I come to free what you hold," Hermes said, "not by cruelty, but by divine decree. His story is not yet over." And just like that, paradise broke. She found Odysseus near the spring, smoothing a strip of bark with a stone, building something, anything, to fill the silence. "They're calling you," she said. "The gods." "They always do," he replied without looking up. "And what do you want?" He turned to her, eyes full of memory and sadness. "I want to go home." She gave him tools, timber, a sail woven from starlight and wind, provisions from her garden, a cloak of wool she spun with her own hands. She helped him build the raft that would take him away from her, and on the final morning they stood in silence as the waves lapped at the hull. "You will die," she said. "One day, cold, old, forgotten." "Yes," he said, "but I will die a man who returned." He sailed at dawn. Behind him the island faded into mist, its trees, its sky, its promise of eternal ease. Ahead, the unknown sea, and whatever gods still wished him lost. But in his chest burned something bright. Not joy, not certainty, resolve. Odysseus had left a goddess for a wife, for a son, for a place called Ithaca. And that choice, fragile as a sail in open waters, was the most human thing he had ever done. Odysseus sailed alone. His raft, a fragile skeleton of timber and twine, creaked against the swell of the open sea. The skies above were a polished blue. The air tasted of salt and sun. For the first time in years, there was no cry of battle, no voice of a god, no whisper of death. Just the sea, just the wind, just the thought of home. Ithaca lay somewhere ahead, still unseen, but real. Each wave carried him closer to Penelope's loom, to Telemachus's eyes, to the olive tree bed still rooted in his memory. He allowed himself a moment of hope. He should not have. Far below, in the palaces of coral and crushed pearl, Poseidon stirred. He had been watching, seething. Odysseus, the mortal who blinded his son Polyphemus, had dared sail freely under open skies, aided by the gods of Olympus, shielded by Athena's favor. No more. "He slips through fingers like sand," the sea god growled, "but even sand can drown." Poseidon rose, a colossus of fury, trident in hand, beard trailing kelp and foam. As he ascended, the ocean answered. Tides buckled, currents screamed, whales dove to the black depths. The sky, moments before serene, twisted into a bruise. Odysseus looked up and knew. It began with silence. Then the wind slammed down with the force of a falling mountain. The sea turned black and began to climb. Not roll, not crash, but climb, like a wall alive with vengeance. Lightning flared, thunder roared. The heavens split open, and the ocean reached to swallow the sky. Odysseus fought the rudder, muscles straining, eyes stinging. The raft shuddered under him, every rope screaming in protest. "Poseidon!" he roared into the gale. "Is this your justice?" But the god did not answer with words. He answered with waves. The raft lifted, spun, dropped, splintered. Water pounded Odysseus's back, tore the cloak from his shoulders, ripped away the mast like it was nothing. Still he clung. Still he endured. Poseidon rose from the storm like a living mountain, thunder in his veins, rage in his gaze. He did not speak. He simply raised his trident high and brought it down. The sea obeyed. A wave taller than the cliffs of Ithaca slammed into Odysseus's raft and shattered it like glass. He was thrown into the surf. No sail, no wood, no direction, just open water and the fury of a god. But not all the divine had abandoned him. From beneath the waves came a shimmer, gentle, quiet, pure. Leucothea, the white sea spirit, rose like a vision from foam. Her eyes were mercy. Her voice was calm. "Wrap this veil around your chest," she said, placing a glowing sash in his hands. "It will keep you afloat. Abandon the wreck. Swim." "Swim where?" "To life," she said. "To shore, if you still believe in it." She vanished. And once more Odysseus chose not comfort, not surrender, but endurance. He swam for 2 days, no food, no sail, no rest. His hands bled, his vision blurred. He lost all sense of time, of self, of anything but stroke after stroke in a sea that wanted him broken. Each time he faltered, the veil lifted him. Each time he sank, the thought of Ithaca pulled him back. By the 3rd day, the waves slackened, and on the 4th morning, the wind shifted. At dawn, a rocky shore broke the horizon. He washed up on it, coughing seawater, arms shaking, half-conscious. Not on Ithaca, not yet, but alive. The veil loosened from his chest and drifted away like a forgotten dream. Odysseus collapsed beneath the shadow of olive trees, barely able to lift his head, soaked and silent. Above him, the sea quieted. Poseidon was gone, not defeated, just finished. His wrath had been spent, and Odysseus, scarred, stripped, stubborn, had survived it. This time Odysseus did not weep. This time he did not curse the gods. He simply rose and walked inland. One final journey remained, not by sea, but by fate, and he would see it through, even if the gods stood in his way. Odysseus woke to birdsong, not gulls or seabirds, but swallows, chirping in cypress trees. The air was cool and dry. The soil beneath him, familiar. Ithaca. After 10 years of war and nearly 10 more at sea, he was finally home. But it was not a joyful return. No horns, no cheers, no banners waving from the cliffs. His kingdom lay beneath a veil of ruin and rot. He did not walk to the palace. He did not reveal his name. Instead, Odysseus sought out a man he remembered from his youth, Eumaeus the swineherd, once a servant, now little more than a poor herdsman living in a wooden hut by the edge of the forest. Eumaeus welcomed him as a stranger, offering wine, bread, and shelter by the fire. "These are hard times," the old man said. "The king has long since vanished. They say he's dead. The suitors grow bold in his absence. They bleed this land like leeches." Odysseus listened. He said nothing. He studied the man's hands, cracked from labor. The hut patched with care. The pigs clean and well-fed. Loyalty, even in absence. That was rarer than gold. That night, while Eumaeus slept, Athena came to Odysseus in the flicker of the firelight. Her eyes were sharp. Her armor gleamed like moonlight on stone. "You have returned," she said. "But you are not safe. Not yet." "You think I don't know," he replied. "My halls are filled with jackals." "Then you must become the shadow," she said. "Not the king, not yet." She touched his shoulder and changed him. His hair grew thin, his back stooped, his eyes clouded. A beggar stood where a hero had knelt. No sword, no crown, just rags and silence. The next day Telemachus returned from his own journey, grown taller, wearier, wiser. Odysseus saw him from the trees and felt a pang of time. How many years had he lost? He remembered the boy chasing goats, not this man with a bow on his shoulder and sorrow behind his eyes. Eumaeus brought the beggar into the hut. Telemachus offered him bread and asked about the mainland. "I have seen kings," the beggar said, "and cowards, but no man so noble as the one your father must have been." Telemachus lowered his eyes. "He's dead," he whispered. "I know it." Silence fell, and then Odysseus revealed himself. The rags fell away. Athena's enchantment lifted. Father and son stood before each other, one aged by war, the other by waiting. They wept, and then they planned. They spoke late into the night, mapping every corridor of the palace, every weakness of the suitors. Telemachus named names: Antinous, Eurymachus, the worst of them all. Odysseus listened, nodding slowly. "They believe this kingdom is theirs," he said. "We will show them otherwise." "With what?" Telemachus asked. "We are 2 men against 50. "We are 2 men who know their home," Odysseus replied, "and they are guests who have overstayed." He would return to the palace not as a king, but as a nobody, the beggar, the shadow, the overlooked, and from within he would strike. 3 days later, Odysseus entered his own hall for the first time in 20 years, unseen. He walked beneath beams he had carved with his father. He passed courtyards where he once taught Telemachus to walk. He watched men, invaders, eat from his stores, drink from his cellars, flirt with his maids. No one saw him. No one cared. A beggar was no threat. But his eyes saw everything, each insult, each cruelty, each man to be remembered when the reckoning came. The quiet before the storm. In the days that followed, Odysseus said little. He slept by the hearth. He asked for scraps. He endured the mockery of the suitors who kicked him, spit at him, called him ghost, vermin, old man. But Penelope watched. The queen had grown colder, sharper. A silver thread of suspicion wove through her glances. "You remind me of someone," she said once, "but I do not know who." Odysseus smiled. Memory is a strange sea. She narrowed her eyes but said nothing more. The plan was set. Odysseus would wait for the contest, the bow of kings, the weapon no man could string but him. Penelope would name it a game, a trial for her hand. And when all had failed, the beggar would rise. This was no longer a story of voyages or monsters. It was a story of home, of cunning, of justice with blood at its edge, of a king, hidden in rags, walking among wolves, patient, coiled, and ready. The hall was heavy with anticipation. Penelope, proud but pale, stood on the dais of her once noble home. Behind her, a line of servant girls watched silently. Before her, a crowd of men lounged like wolves around a dying fire, the suitors dressed in stolen finery, goblets in hand, arrogance on every tongue. "You've waited long," the queen said, voice steady, "and I have delayed. But no more. I will choose a husband." A murmur rippled through the room. Antinous raised his cup in mock salute. Eurymachus smirked. "Let it be known," she continued, "that I will marry the man who can string this bow, my husband's bow, and shoot an arrow cleanly through 12 axe heads, aligned in a row." Servants entered, bearing the weapon. Gasps filled the room. It was Odysseus's bow, curved, polished, carved from horn and sinew, rarely seen, never touched. A gift from Iphitus, it had rested in the storeroom since before the war. No man had lifted it in 2 decades, not even Telemachus. And now, it was the key to the throne. Penelope stepped back. "You want my hand?" she said. "Then prove you have the strength of the king." One by one, the suitors approached, each man confident, each man doomed. They laughed at first, then they grunted, then cursed, then sweated. None could even string the bow. Antinous snarled and blamed the humidity. Eurymachus demanded new grease. One tried warming the bow by the fire. "This is absurd," one suitor muttered. "No man alive can bend that thing." From the shadows, the beggar watched. At last, after hours of failure and delay, the beggar rose. The suitors fell silent, blinking at him. "I'd like to try," he said, voice calm. The room erupted in laughter. "You," Antinous jeered, "you can barely hold a spoon." "Let him try," Penelope said, her eyes unreadable. "The gods grant strength to strange hands." Reluctantly, Telemachus handed him the bow. Odysseus weighed the weapon in his hands. He turned it, slowly, respectfully. His fingers ran along its grain like he was greeting an old friend. Then, with the grace of memory and the strength of kingship, he bent it and strung it. No effort, no sound, just silence. A new silence, not of mockery, but of dread. He picked up an arrow, walked to the row of axe heads, nocked it, drew. His eyes were calm, his breath steady. He loosed. The arrow sang through the air. 12 axe heads, one shot, dead center. The suitors stared, mouths open. Odysseus turned, his back straightened, his shoulders rose. The years of disguise melted from his face. "You look surprised," he said. "You shouldn't be." He stepped into the center of the room, the bow in one hand, the next arrow in the other. "You fed on my food, slept in my bed, tried to steal my wife." His eyes burned now. His voice dropped like stone in water. "You forgot what a king looks like. Let me remind you. He raised the bow again, this time not at a target, but at Antinous. The suitor still held his goblet, frozen in mid-drink. The arrow struck him clean through the throat. The goblet shattered, wine mixed with blood. The hall exploded into chaos. "You killed him!" Eurymachus screamed. "You'll die for that, beggar, or no. I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca. You invaded my house. Now you will pay." Telemachus ran to his side. Eumaeus and Philoetius barred the doors. There would be no escape, no mercy. Odysseus and his son stood together, bow and sword in hand, and turned the feast into a reckoning. Each arrow found its mark. Each suitor fell. Men who had mocked his name now begged for it, but he offered no forgiveness. This was not the battlefield. This was his home, and it would be cleansed. Above, in her chamber, Penelope sat alone, listening to the cries below. Her face was still. She did not weep. Only when the cries ended and silence returned did she rise and descend the stairs, step by step, toward a man with blood on his hands and love in his eyes. But that is the next story. The battle was over. The great hall of Ithaca lay shrouded in silence, thick with smoke and blood. Bodies of suitors sprawled across marble and reed mats, their feast turned to funerary stillness. Broken cups, overturned tables, spilled wine staining the stone like shadowed blood. Odysseus stood amid it all, breathing hard. His bow dangled from one hand, his sword slick with judgment. Telemachus moved beside him, equally still. "It's done," the prince said. "No," Odysseus answered, "not yet." Before he could reclaim his throne, before he could speak to his wife, the house had to be cleansed. The maids loyal to the suitors were judged. Some were pardoned, others not. The hearth was relit. Fire and water were used to scrub away the stain of years. Eumaeus spread fresh rushes on the floor. Philoetius opened the shutters to let in the salt wind. They dressed Odysseus in clean robes. They bathed him in warm water, combed the salt from his beard, rubbed olive oil into his calloused hands. A golden clasp fastened his cloak. The scar on his thigh, proof of past wars, remained untouched. He looked like a king again, but he still didn't know if he was truly home, not until she looked at him and saw him. Penelope stood at the top of the staircase. Her hair was bound in silver thread. Her eyes, wise, sorrowed, skeptical, swept the room. She saw the corpses. She saw her son, and she saw him, the man with her husband's face, but her heart did not leap. She did not run to him. Too many lies, too many years. She looked at him as one might look at a ghost. "You say you are Odysseus," she said softly. "Many have said that." "They were wrong," he replied. "I am not like them." "No," she said, "you are not." And yet, she still held her distance. Servants cleared the hall, and night fell heavy on Ithaca. Penelope ordered the guest chamber to be prepared. "Move the great bed there," she told Euryclea, the old nurse. Odysseus turned to her then, sharply, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" "The bed," she replied coolly. "Let it be moved." "That bed," Odysseus said slowly, "cannot be moved." The words hung in the air like a drawn bow. He stepped forward, voice low but charged. "You forget. I built that bed myself, out of an olive tree. I carved the frame into the roots while the tree still stood. I laid stone around it. I shaped the room around the tree. No one," he said, "can move that bed unless they tear it from the earth." Penelope's eyes filled with tears, not because he was angry, but because only Odysseus could know the secret of the olive tree bed, their marriage bed, living and unmovable, born of earth and craftsmanship and intimacy. "Odysseus," she whispered. "It's me," he said. "I have come home." She ran to him then, not the queen but the wife. She threw her arms around his neck. Her tears soaked into his shoulder. He held her like he was drowning, and she was land. "Forgive me," she said over and over. "I had to be sure." "You were right to test me," he whispered. "It has been so long. We are not the same." "No," she said, "but we are still us." They sat on the edge of the unmovable bed. the same one they had once built together. And they talked, through the night like lovers and strangers at once. She told him of dreams and loneliness. He told her of storms and monsters and hunger and hope. The fire burned low, and for the first time in 20 years, Odysseus slept in his own bed, beside the woman who had waited, clever and unbroken, for him to find his way home. When the sun rose, it found Ithaca at peace. Not restored, not yet, but reclaimed. Morning came soft over Ithaca, but it did not bring quiet. Crows circled above the great hall. The wind carried the stench of blood. Servants worked in silence, dragging bodies of suitors into carts, scrubbing the stone floor until their hands bled. In the courtyard, Telemachus oversaw the work with a prince's gravity, his youth sheared off in a single night. Inside, Odysseus stood before the hearth with Penelope, watching the flames rise, wrapped in fresh robes, but still carrying the weight of his homecoming like a stone on his back. "I have reclaimed my house," he said, "but not yet my land, and not yet the peace." Word spread quickly across Ithaca and beyond. By midday, families of the slain suitors had gathered. Fathers, brothers, cousins, some noble, some mercenary, all filled with rage. One of them, Eupeithes, father of Antinous, stood tall at the head of the crowd. "You murdered them," he bellowed to the assembled elders. "Without trial, without cause, this was not justice, it was slaughter." Some murmured agreement. Others remembered how long the suitors had fed on Odysseus's wealth like leeches. But the mood was unsteady. War loomed again. Odysseus strode into the council square, no longer cloaked as a beggar or veiled in legend. He stood bareheaded, sword on his hip, scar on his thigh, undeniably himself. "You know me," he said. "I fought for this land. I bled for it. I left as your king. I return as your king, but I offer more than titles." He paused. The crowd listened. "The suitors took what was not theirs. They shamed my house and plotted against my son. Still, I do not seek more blood." He turned to Telemachus. "Let their families be paid in gold and cattle. Let the gods bear witness. Let it end here." Silence followed, then murmurs, then nods. Peace perhaps could still be bought, but not by all. Eupeithes refused the offering. He rode at the head of a small band, sword drawn, face dark with grief and vengeance. They came at dusk, while Ithaca held its breath. Odysseus met them in the olive fields, flanked by Telemachus, Eumaeus, Philoetius, and Athena in the form of Mentor. The old warrior's fury burned hot and quick. "Let the gods judge us," Odysseus said, and loosed the first spear. It struck Eupeithes in the throat. The others faltered. Then Athena raised her voice, terrible and divine, "Enough!" And suddenly they stopped. The air shimmered. Fear gripped their hearts. The goddess revealed herself, towering above them, her aegis shining with the fury of Olympus. "The blood has run long enough," she declared. "Let there be peace, or let wrath consume you all." The mortals dropped their weapons. Odysseus lowered his sword. That night, under starlight, Odysseus met with the remaining nobles and elders. Offerings were made to Zeus and Athena. Oaths were sworn over fire and wine. Hands were clasped. Odysseus promised to rule with justice. The people pledged loyalty in return. Ithaca, long fractured by absence and ambition, was made whole again. Odysseus returned to his hall, not as a warrior, not as a beggar, but as a king. He passed under the lintel carved with olive leaves, touched the old stone with reverence, and sat beside Penelope, hand in hand. The throne was no longer empty, and the long journey at last was truly over. The olive tree still stood, its roots wrapped around the foundations of the palace. Its branches reached skyward, fed by rain and memory. It had weathered storms, silence and sorrow, just like the man who now slept within reach of its trunk. And though more stories would be told, and time would claim even heroes, the tale of Odysseus, king, wanderer, husband, father, was finished. Composed in the 7th century BC, Homer's Odyssey became a shared narrative across Greek city-states. Its characters and themes forged a pan-Hellenic identity, creating a common civic ethos amid local rivalries. The values of xenia, hospitality, nostos, homecoming, arete, excellence, Loyalty, divine reverence, and justice are woven into every episode, reflecting societal and ethical norms of the time. In ancient Greek education, paideia, the Odyssey was more than literature. It was a moral compass. Schoolboys memorized passages to internalize virtues: Odysseus's cunning and perseverance, Penelope's chastity, Eumaeus's loyalty. Meanwhile, violations of hospitality and fidelity, Polyphemus's savagery, the suitor's parasitic behavior, served as cautionary examples of dike or societal justice. In ancient Greece, the Odyssey was not only recited, it was depicted. Scenes from Odysseus's journey appeared on pottery, frescoes, and relief sculptures. His encounter with the Cyclops, his journey past the Sirens, and his return to Ithaca. Artists used these motifs to teach and entertain, cementing his image as both intellectual and heroic. Virgil's Aeneid, Rome's national epic, deliberately echoes Homeric structure and themes, linking Rome's glorious past to Greek legacy numberanalytics.com. During the Renaissance, humanists rediscovered Homer as a wellspring of moral and philosophical values. Dante in Inferno reimagines Odysseus as a symbol of exploration and intellectual ambition, while Shakespeare alludes to Homeric journeys in his dramas, making ancient heroism speak to early modern emotional experience and political insight. According to classicist Edith Hall, the Odyssey is often described as the very birthplace of literary fiction in the West. T.E. Lawrence even called it the greatest novel ever written for its narrative richness, psychological depth, and complex layered characters. Its episodic structure, use of flashbacks, and focus on internal states like longing, guilt, identity, make it resonate with modern narrative forms. Aristotle referenced Odysseus to illustrate phronesis, practical wisdom, since the hero balances cleverness, moral decision-making, and resilience. His resilience and adaptability embodied Stoic ideals, which later philosophers admired, while Plato often explored Odysseus's moral ambivalence in conversations about the philosopher king versus the cunning intellectual. Themes like the hero's quest for identity and home, nostos, have been widely used in existential and psychoanalytic inquiries. The nostalgia heaves beneath the narrative. Odysseus's external voyage mirrors his internal struggle for self-recognition and reintegration into Ithaca, a land of memory and identity. Modern analysis sees him as an archetype of exile, wanderer, survivor. Modern works revisit familiar episodes from fresh angles. Margaret Atwood's The Penelopiad renders Penelope's inner life, with new voices of the 12 hanged maids, recasting the epic through feminist critique. Madeline Miller's Circe transforms a side figure into a fully realized character, turning Odysseus's journey into a story of power, magic, and survival under feminine agency. These reinterpretations interrogate archaic gender roles and amplify voices, Penelope, Circe, Helen, that Homer all but silenced. James Joyce's Ulysses reimagines Odysseus's wandering over the course of a single day in Dublin. The 18-episode structure loosely corresponds to Homer's 24 books, and characters like Leopold Bloom and Stephen Dedalus parallel Odysseus and Telemachus. Joyce explores the hero's journey in the mundane, psychological, and routinized modern world, forging a literary revolution rooted in Homeric structure and emotional resonance. The Odyssey's influence stretches across genres and media. The Coen brothers' film O Brother, Where Art Thou? Transposes Odyssean themes into 1930s American South, to comedic effect, but with deep resonance of homecoming, moral choice, and escape. Video games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey immerse players in the Greek world, blending historical simulation with mythic storytelling. Modern novels like Chigozie Obioma's An Orchestra of Minorities echo Odysseus's themes via stories of migration, identity, and lost home. Translations have shaped reception across eras. George Chapman's Elizabethan English version inspired Keats to write the sonnet On First Looking into Chapman's Homer, and influenced poets like Coleridge to see Homeric tales in a new light. Alexander Pope's 1726 heroic couplet translation made the poem accessible to English readers, and defined poetic diction for generations. Today, translators like Anne Dacier in 1716 and Emily Wilson in 2017 approach Homer with sensitivity to gender and fidelity, reshaping how the epic speaks to modern readers and promoting inclusivity in interpretation. The word Odyssey itself, meaning a long, event-filled journey, has entered global idiom. References to an odyssey in advertising, politics, or personal storytelling evoke not just travel, but transformation, adversity, and eventual belonging. Educational systems worldwide continue to teach the Odyssey, its complexity seen as fertile ground for critical thinking, rhetoric, and moral reflection. Leaders often invoke Odysseus's cunning and leadership in speeches and analysis about governance, strategy, or resilience in crisis. Scholars argue that Odyssey remains vital in times of trauma and displacement. The themes of homecoming, exile, endurance under divine fury, and struggle with memory speak powerfully in post-war societies. Films like Umberto Pasolini's The Return and modern translations by Daniel Mendelsohn reflect on the mental scars of heroes returning after war, and some who cannot bear to face home again. Greek philosopher-poet Nikos Kazantzakis wrote The Odyssey, a modern sequel, 1938, imagining Odysseus refusing to rest in peace and seeking new adventures. Though controversial, it speaks to enduring fascination with the hero's restless spirit. Feminist and post-colonial critics have challenged traditional depictions, especially of Penelope, Circe, and Helen, examining issues of patriarchy, sexual violence, and marginalized perspectives in the epic narrative. Simultaneously, scholars like Emily Wilson promote translations that foreground nuance, gender awareness, and historical context, avoiding editorial bias or narrative. Odysseus's journey is at once deeply personal and universal, a reflection on grief, temptation, memory, identity, and resilience. His journey home is symbolic of the human condition, lost, tested, flawed, but striving to re-find oneself and one's place. Unlike simpler heroes, Odysseus is celebrated for wit as much as strength. He lies, deceives, compromises, reflective of moral ambiguity. Contemporary values embrace such complexity rather than perfection, making him more relatable than many deified icons. The Odyssey adapts easily across settings and media, whether medieval frescoes or contemporary graphic novels, operas, films, video games, or feminist retellings. Its themes can be reshaped and reapplied endlessly. The core story remains meaningful across time because its marrow is about the quest for home and identity. From the shores of ancient Greece to tomorrow's screens and classrooms, Homer's Odyssey remains more than an epic. It is an ever-living work, a dialogue across centuries with each new generation of readers, thinkers, leaders, and storytellers. Its legacy endures because the journey speaks to something timeless, the struggle to return to home, to self, to integrity, despite loss, suffering, and divine indifference. And as long as we search for meaning in suffering, as long as we dream of home, Odysseus will walk with us. After the smoke of Troy's fall had cleared and the clamor of war faded into distant memory, Odysseus, king of Ithaca, set sail with his weary men, eager to return home. Yet, what should have been a straightforward voyage became a decade-long odyssey, a relentless saga of peril, endurance, and transformation. From the very beginning, the gods watched and shaped his fate. Poseidon, angered by Odysseus's blinding of his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, unleashed storms and obstacles that scattered the fleet and tested the limits of human resolve. Odysseus and his men first landed at Ismarus, home of the Cyclones, where their hunger for plunder brought swift and brutal retribution. This foreshadowed a journey where temptation and recklessness often proved as dangerous as the monsters they faced. They next encountered the Lotus Eaters, whose sweet blossoms offered an escape from memory and desire, threatening to trap the men in forgetfulness forever. Odysseus's iron will was the only anchor that pulled them back toward their true purpose: home. Their path led them through the realm of the Laestrygonians, giant cannibals whose savage attack decimated their ships, and then to Aeolus, master of the winds, who gifted Odysseus a bag of winds, only for his men's greed and curiosity to undo that blessing. Odysseus's greatest challenges awaited beyond the mortal realm in the land of the dead, where he sought the prophet Tiresias. There, in the shadowed world of shades, he confronted the fate that lay ahead and learned that his journey would be long and fraught, but not without hope. He faced enchantments from the sorceress Circe, the deadly allure of the Sirens whose voices promised forbidden knowledge, and the twin terrors of Scylla and Charybdis, a rock and whirlpool that allowed no safe passage. Each trial demanded a new kind of courage, a sharper mind, and sacrifices that weighed heavy on his heart. Despite the warnings, his men's disobedience brought tragedy when they slaughtered the sacred cattle of Helios, earning the wrath of the gods that destroyed all but Odysseus's ship. He was left alone at sea, adrift and broken, until finally washed ashore on the island of Calypso. There, for 7 years, the nymph held him captive, offering immortality and escape from suffering. Yet Odysseus's heart never strayed from Ithaca. With divine intervention, he finally left Calypso's island, only to face one last furious tempest from Poseidon. When at last he returned to Ithaca, Odysseus found a home overrun by suitors vying for Penelope's hand and his throne. Disguised and alone, he planned his vengeance carefully, revealing himself only when he was ready. His brutal reclaiming of the palace was not just a battle of swords, but a reclaiming of identity, order, and honor. Reunited with Penelope and his son Telemachus, Odysseus's journey ended where it had begun, in the olive groves and rocky cliffs of his beloved island. But the man who returned was not the same as the one who had left. He was tempered by loss, hardened by struggle, and enlightened by wisdom born of suffering. The heart of the Odyssey, more than a journey. At its core, the Odyssey is a story about the complexity of homecoming. Odysseus's voyage across the seas mirrors the journey every human undertakes through life, navigating trials, confronting temptations, overcoming grief, and growing through hardship. His story reveals that the greatest monsters to face are often within ourselves, our fears, desires, and doubts. The gods' interventions, the monsters' attacks, and the seductions of enchantresses are symbols of these internal battles. Odysseus's cunning and strength are remarkable, but what defines him most is his unyielding longing for home, not just the place, but the people, the memory, the identity it holds. The journey shaped him as much as the destination awaited him.